On January 17, 1917, a British cryptographer in an Admiralty basement decrypted a telegram that would bring the United States into the First World War within 11 weeks. The encrypted cable had been intercepted in transit from Berlin to Mexico City. The codebook had been secretly captured 2 years earlier in Tanzania. The plaintext was deadliest. Germany was secretly proposing a military alliance with Mexico. Mexican attack on the United States in exchange for the return of Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. The most consequential intercept of the war. 2 million casualties already. America rendered no longer neutral within minutes of Woodrow Wilson reading it. This is File 24, the Zimmermann telegram. The German Foreign Ministry's strategic calculation in January 1917 was direct. The Western Front trench warfare deadlock had consumed 2 years, and nearly 2 million casualties without strategic resolution. Britain was being slowly strangled by German submarine warfare against merchant shipping, but was not yet broken. The German High Command had convinced Kaiser Wilhelm II that resuming unrestricted submarine warfare, sinking neutral ships including American merchant vessels, was the only path to forcing British capitulation before the German army ran out of men. The High Command also accepted that resuming unrestricted submarine warfare against American shipping would force the United States into the war on the Allied side within months. The German Foreign Ministry's task, assigned by the Kaiser to Foreign Minister Arthur Zimmermann, was to delay or distract American entry by creating a parallel strategic problem on the American southwestern frontier. Zimmermann drafted the diplomatic instruction in mid-January 1917. The instruction proposed a formal Mexican-German alliance, a Mexican declaration of war on the United States, German weapons and money supporting a Mexican military campaign to recover Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. The proposal did not need to succeed to be useful to Germany. The proposal needed only to delay or fragment American attention. The instruction was encrypted using German diplomatic code 1T3040, a codebook cipher in which each German word in the dictionary was paired with a 5-digit cipher number. Encryption was straightforward word substitution. Cryptographic security depended entirely on the codebook itself remaining secret. The encrypted telegram, designated Cable 158, was transmitted on January 16, 1917, by transatlantic submarine cable from Berlin to the German embassy in Washington, for onward forwarding to the German minister in Mexico City. The cable route, Berlin to Copenhagen by overland telegraph. Copenhagen to a relay station outside London by Trans-North Sea submarine cable. London relay to the transatlantic submarine cable. Physically passed through British-controlled territory at the London relay. Within 90 minutes of transmission, a copy of the cipher groups had been intercepted by a British Naval Intelligence intercept station. Within another 90 minutes, the copy was in the hands of the duty cryptographer at room 40 in the Admiralty basement. The Germans did not know that. The Germans believed the cable was secure. The British capability to decrypt Cable 158 in January 1917 rested on a single piece of strategic luck from 2 years earlier. In 1915, British colonial military forces had seized the German wireless transmission station at Dar es Salaam in German East Africa. The German station operator had not had time to retrieve the diplomatic and military codebooks stored in the station's cabinets. The Royal Navy intelligence officer attached to the seizure team had recognized the diplomatic code 13040 binding and ordered the codebooks sealed for transport back to London. By the time the codebooks reached room 40 in the Admiralty basement in early 1916, Captain William Hall, the Director of Naval Intelligence, the architect of room 40, had assembled the most sophisticated cryptographic operation in the world. 20 cryptographers worked under him at long oak tables. Mathematicians and linguists recruited from across British academia worked alongside Royal Navy officers. The captured codebooks became the foundation of a patient, multi-year codebook reconstruction effort against German diplomatic communications. For the next 2 years, every intercepted German diplomatic telegram was cross-referenced against the captured codebooks. Every new word was added to the reconstructed codebook. Every cipher group that appeared in multiple telegrams was used to confirm or refute hypothesized plaintext entries. By January 1917, Room 40 had reconstructed approximately 70% of Code 13040. On the morning of January 17th, the duty cryptographer received cable 158 from the British Naval Intelligence Cable Tap Station. She began decrypting. She matched each 5-digit cipher group against the reconstructed codebook. Most groups had known plaintexts. The pencil-marked decryption built word by word. Mexico, Alliance, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, return. She picked up her telephone and asked for Captain Hall. By evening of January 17th, the full plaintext was in Hall's hands. Now Hall had a problem of a completely different order. Hall's disclosure problem after January 17, 1917, was not whether to share the telegram with the United States. The strategic value of the intercept was obvious. Hall's disclosure problem was how to share the telegram without revealing that Britain had compromised German diplomatic code 13040. If Hall delivered the decrypted telegram directly to the American government and explained how Britain had obtained the plaintext, the Americans would inevitably question the British source. The Germans would eventually learn from American or Mexican leaks that the telegram had been decrypted by British intelligence. The Germans would deduce that British intelligence had compromised Code 13040. The Germans would replace Code 13040 with a new codebook. Britain would lose its principal source of German diplomatic intelligence. A multi-year cryptographic investment for the marginal benefit of a single telegram. Hall's solution was operationally elegant. The telegram, once it reached the German embassy in Washington, was being forwarded to the German minister in Mexico City through commercial Mexican telegraph networks. Britain had discreet relationships with several Mexican commercial telegraph employees. A copy of the forwarding cable could be obtained from a Mexican commercial telegraph source. That had nothing to do with the Berlin to Washington intercept. Hall waited. The German embassy in Washington forwarded cable 158 to the German minister in Mexico City in late January. A copy was obtained discreetly by a British asset in early February. The Mexico-sourced copy contained the same plaintext as Room 40's January 17 decryption. On February 22, 1917, Hall met with United States Ambassador Walter H. Page in the American Embassy in central London. He placed the Mexico-sourced copy of the telegram on the conference table. He explained the contents in plain English. He explained that the source was a Mexican commercial telegraph employee with anti-German sympathies. He did not mention Room 40. He did not mention Code 13040. He did not mention the Berlin to Washington cable intercept. Page read the telegram twice. He looked up at Hall. He said, "I will cable this directly to the President tonight." The cable left the American Embassy in London at approximately 10 in the evening. Of February 22, 1917. President Woodrow Wilson received it in Washington overnight. President Woodrow Wilson read the Zimmermann telegram on the evening of February 22, 1917. He spent the next several days in cabinet deliberation. He had the option of publishing the telegram immediately, or holding it as classified intelligence. Holding it was the cautious choice. Publishing it was the path that would most rapidly shift American public opinion in favor of war. He authorized release on March 1, 1917. The text was provided to the Associated Press. The story dominated the front page of every major American newspaper. Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, American territory whose return to Mexico was being proposed by a German foreign minister behind the back of the United States. American public opinion shifted in real time across early March. Newspapers across the political spectrum, including isolationist papers that had previously opposed American entry into the war, began endorsing intervention. State legislatures passed resolutions condemning Germany. American military preparedness accelerated. The remaining strategic question was whether Germany would deny the telegram or confirm it. 2 days after the American newspaper publication, on March 3, 1917, Foreign Minister Arthur Zimmermann called a press conference at the German Foreign Ministry and publicly confirmed the telegram was real. He attempted to clarify that the proposal had been conditional on the United States entering the war first. Only if America declared war on Germany would Mexico be asked to ally with Germany. The clarification did not undo the strategic damage. The clarification confirmed what the Americans already strongly believed. On April 2, 1917, President Wilson delivered his war message address to a joint session of the United States Congress. On April 6, the Congress declared a state of war between the United States and Germany. The American Expeditionary Force began arriving in Europe in mid-1917. Inside Room 40 in the Admiralty basement, Captain Hall continued his work. The Germans never deduced that British intelligence had compromised Code 13040. Code 13040 continued to deliver intercept product to Room 40 for the remainder of the war. Hall's cover story had held. Both strategic objectives, accelerating American entry into the war and preserving the cryptographic source, were achieved. The strategic mathematics of the intercept were stark. The First World War had already produced approximately 2 million dead by the end of 1916. The Western Front trenches had remained essentially static for 2.5 years. The Battle of the Somme alone had caused over 1 million combined casualties between the two sides. For territorial gains measured in single-digit kilometers, the American Expeditionary Force, when it eventually arrived in France in late 1917 and reached full combat strength in mid-1918, contributed approximately 2 million fresh combat troops to the Allied line. American supply, American manpower, and American industrial capacity were the strategic differentiators that broke the deadlock by November 1918. Without the Zimmermann telegram, American entry into the war would have happened anyway. The unrestricted submarine warfare campaign was sinking American merchant ships at a rate that made declaration of war eventually unavoidable. But the telegram accelerated the political timeline by an estimated 4 to 8 weeks. Those 4 to 8 weeks landed in early spring 1917, when the German Army's manpower reserves were near their 1917 peak, and American industrial mobilization was just beginning. The compressed timeline meant the Americans arrived in France, while German strategic reserves were still being depleted by the spring offensives of 1918. Historians have estimated that the telegram's acceleration of American entry shortened the war by between 3 and 6 months. At 3 months of compressed conflict, the casualty differential alone is on the order of 500,000 combined dead, wounded, and missing. The Zimmermann decryption, a single telegram decrypted in a basement by 20 cryptographers using a captured codebook, had a humanitarian impact more measurable than the entire battlefield career of any single Allied general. Signals intelligence in 1917 demonstrated for the first time that a small civilian-staffed cryptographic office could shift the strategic balance of a global conflict more reliably than any battlefield decision. The Zimmermann telegram demonstrated a theorem of signals intelligence that has only become more dangerous in the century since. a signals intelligence agency that intercepts a strategically valuable communication, faces an unavoidable trilemma: act on the intelligence in any visible way, and the adversary will eventually deduce that the underlying communication channel has been compromised. But in burning the source, hold the intelligence and forfeit the strategic value of having intercepted it, or invent a parallel construction cover story. FIWA. A different, plausible source for the intelligence that allows action without revealing the underlying collection capability. Captain Hall's 1917 cover story, The Mexican Commercial Telegraph Employee with Anti-German Sympathies, was the canonical solution to that trilemma. The cover protected Code 13040 for the remainder of the war. Code 13040 produced strategic intelligence product for British naval intelligence, until the German diplomatic codebooks were rotated for unrelated reasons in late 1918. The session is logged. The connection is closed. The files remain open. Every modern signals intelligence operation faces the same trilemma every day. Every cyber collection program, every diplomatic cable intercept, every supply chain implant audio capture, every machine learning trained surveillance pipeline. Each one is constrained by the same disclosure problem. Each one operates behind the same kind of parallel construction cover stories that Hall invented in 1917. The Edward Snowden disclosures of 2013, when read against the Zimmermann case, demonstrate exactly how durable Hall's solution has become. Snowden's leaked documents revealed that the United States National Security Agency had been intercepting the diplomatic communications of approximately 122 foreign heads of state, including close allies. The political damage from the disclosure was severe. The German Chancellor's personal mobile phone had been a long-running NSA target. The Brazilian president's communications had been collected for years. Each of those collection programs had been authorized internally, on the assumption that the source could be protected by parallel construction cover stories. That whatever strategic actions the United States took on the basis of the intelligence would be attributed to other plausible sources. The Snowden disclosures broke the cover stories all at once. The same trilemma Hall faced in 1917, act, hold, or invent a cover, became unsolvable when an insider leaked the entire underlying collection capability to the public. Hall's solution depended on the cover story remaining intact for as long as the source needed protection. A cryptographic source can be protected for a century if the cover story survives. A cryptographic source becomes worthless overnight if the cover collapses. The Zimmermann cover story held for 46 years. The full British account of the codebook seizure, the Room 40 reconstruction, and the parallel construction Mexican source fabrication was not published until Barbara Tuchman's 1958 book. Code 13040 had long since been retired. The Germans of the Weimar period had no operational use for the disclosure. The Germans of the Nazi period faced their own cryptographic problems. By the time the truth was published, the strategic value of having protected the source had been collected in full. Which leaves us with the closing question of File 24. Which intercept of yours, of your countries, of your closest allies, do you trust the least to not be sitting in some operations center right now, protected by a cover story that was invented decades ago, still working today, still buying time for the source, while the strategic action proceeds in plain sight?